Hello everyone. Today we have a 2004 Chevrolet Classic with a 2.2 liter ecotec with a few miles on it. And we're going to pull it out and take it apart today. Now, from the service information on this car, I gathered this is the original engine and it's never been out. There's no way of knowing that for sure, but I'm just going to assume it. Now, complaints, it does burn a considerable amount of oil and it throws blue smoke once in a while. It's not too bad, but it is embarrassing. It is noticeable. And that's about it. I mean, it's quiet. It doesn't clank or knock. There's no coolant in the oil or anything like that. It pretty much runs pretty good. So I'm expecting to find the valve seals are probably shot, maybe the piston rings are worn out, and the rest of it will probably be within specifications. So let's get started. Always disconnect the battery first. Safety first. You're not going to believe this, but I just dropped and lost a 10mm socket. Oh, wait. Here it is. Ah. That do it? Yeah. I broke this clip because I didn't know how to take it out. The proper way is you separate it by lifting the head up. The core comes out of it and then it can compress and slide out. So I'm either going to glue this one back together or replace it. Couldn't figure out how to take the cables off the throttle body, so I'm just detaching the whole thing and putting it aside for now. That had two wire connections here. This one has this safety thing you have to detach from it before you can unplug it. Now, first thing we found is cracked vacuum line. This goes, I believe this is the purge valve for the charcoal canister. Fuel injector harness unplugs here. Got a vacuum line down there. And it's got this plug that goes here. And I think we're ready to pull the plenum off. Got a clamp thing down here. Is that it? There's got to be another one somewhere. Maybe not. Okay, fuel rail has to come off first. Okay, there's two bolts, one here and one here. They're 13mm and they're pretty tight, and they've been pre-rounded off. So, try a 6-point socket. Yeah, I already cracked that one loose. Ah. Yeah, it looks like all of this is, all these lines are stainless steel, which is pretty impressive. I mean, usually they're plastic or something. Injectors should come off with this thing. And yes, they did. If any of that stuff's in the way later, I'll remove it. Okay, dipstick tube is still attached. Oh, come on. Okay. Something else holding it. Some kind of wire. Oh, the vacuum line, I think. There we go. That is the intake manifold, or the plenum, whatever you want to call it. So my plan is to remove as much from the engine as I can before I pull it, which will make it easier to get to stuff, even though it was probably installed fully assembled. Now, there's this massive network of cooling hoses all over the place, so I'm just going to turn the camera off and remove the cooling system, and we'll come back then. I drained the cooling system, pulled the hoses out. The recovery bottle, the radiator's still in there. I don't think I'll have to remove it, it's not in the way of anything. Also, what I did was I pulled the electrical harnesses out, because there's about 3 big cables that run through here. This is one. Goes on there about like so. It attaches to the generator and the air conditioner, compressor, the starter, a few other things. It's got this thing that wraps around the front of the engine and goes to a sensor behind it. And there's this harness, which goes in there, weaves around the cooling fans. It controls the cooling fans, and this part goes into the air conditioner somewhere. I don't really make note over these plugs or where they go, because usually there's no two alike. They'll only go on one way. And the third one is this over here, the battery connectors. And this has 2 grounds. This one, which goes to the body, and this one, which, no, maybe I have them backwards. Either way, one goes to the body and one goes to the engine. And it goes to a stud down here, which is also a bolt that holds the engine to the transaxle. Now this green cable, that's for the power, and it goes to a starter terminal down there where it also connects to a battery cable. And the current wire is green, which is pretty unusual. They're usually red. So the air conditioning compressor, that comes off the same way as the generator. It's held on with 3 bolts. The starter comes off with 3 bolts. I mean 2 bolts. And the bolts that hold the torque converter to the flex plate come out through there. There's 3 of them. And the way I did it was I took them out one at a time and rotated the engine from the crankshaft pulley. The power steering pump, that's attached to the back of the head with 2 bolts. It's got like a hexagon drive that attaches to one of the camshafts. Now the exhaust put up quite a fight. There's 3 bolts that hold the exhaust pipe to the manifold. One came out easy. The other 2 I plasma cut out, and I'm still having trouble getting it out. I expected them to put up a fight, so I unbolted the manifold from the head, and most of the studs came out easy, but this one here at the end is broken off, and it's been like that for a while, so I'm guessing the other half is still in the head. I don't know. So next, I'm assuming there's a bracket holding the transaxle to the front of the engine, which is normally the way these are. There's 4 engine mounts, and 3 of them attached to the transaxle. There's only 1 on the engine, which is right here. So the Haynes manual reads that you can pull the engine from up top. You have to remove the crankshaft pulley, so I'm going to try that next and remove the bracket up front. These are made to be dropped out from underneath, but you can pull the engine and transaxle separately from up top. I've done it with a W body at a Buick 3800. This should be easier. There's more space. Now there's a bunch of bolts that attach the engine block and the oil pan to the transaxle, so I'll have to do those next. And after that, should be ready to lift it. Alright, so I pulled the right front wheel off, and we're looking at the front of the engine. Now, there's no way I can get the pulley off without dropping the engine lower, so for now I'm just going to leave it. I'll pull the bolt out because it is sticking out pretty far. So I did find the bracket. It's back here. You can't really see it from here, but it's held onto it's like a cast aluminum looking thing. It almost looks like part of the transaxle, but it's bolted onto the end with 2 bolts and bolted to the side of the engine with 2. So we'll pull all those out. Okay, so I pulled the bolt holding the pulley on. Figured I'd need a puller, but the pulley just fell off. Is this normal? I don't know, but I don't care. I didn't have to fight it. And I took 2 of the bolts out on this bracket. I have removed the front mount. I've removed all but 1 of the bolts holding the engine to the transaxle. I got a chain attached to the eyelets on each side with some tension on it already. So I'm going to pull the 1 bolt out and see what happens. Try prying it loose. Well, that was easy. Yeah, there's plenty of room actually. Might scratch up the paint on the body on this side, but plenty of room to clear from the torque converter. I guess we'll just keep jacking it up and see what happens. Okay, in the way of the exhaust. Move the car back, try to move the engine forward. I think that did it. Okay, I need to do something about the heater hoses. They're still attached. Okay, detached them. Spilled coolant all over the place. Now I need this thing attached. Caught the throttle cable. Taking a good look at this thing. This is the back side, or engine right side, where the exhaust manifold attaches. And sure enough, it does have a broken stud inside of it. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that. Another thing is back here near the heater hoses, there's a, looks like a coolant temp sensor. And I didn't unplug it. I pulled the wires out of it. So that's an easy fix. And that's about those are the only problems I really see. Everything else looks pretty good. So we'll start taking it apart now. Here we go. This thing has about 4 bolts inside, so you have to remove the ignition module to take this off. And it looks pretty clean inside. It's about what I expected. Okay, I think my 100-year-old screwdriver is falling apart. I think this bolt here also holds it on. I thought it held something internal, but it's not coming off, so we'll try pulling that. Whoop. Okay, people, I should have read the repair manual first. It also told me not to mix up the bolts, which I already have. Oh well. So, I got a tray under here to pick up the oil. Whoops. And it looks like the belt tensioner also goes through to the block. Hopefully it'll come off now. There we go. And it's still pretty clean. Tensioner's kind of loose. I've seen on other engines on the internet, these are usually busted up, these tensioners. This one looks pretty good. And, oh, wait. Never mind. It's part of one somewhere. I'm going to set this at number 1, top dead center, before I take it apart, just for fun. Okay, this plug was on really good. I fought it really good off camera. It's finally out. Chain tensioner. Maybe that comes out later. Alright, so I pulled the head bolts off. These were stuck in there real good. They took some effort to break loose. I had to run out and get a 6-point socket for them because the 12-point was just rounding them off. So, got these. And then there's 4 small bolts. One goes down in here, 2 up front here, and 1 down here. So I pulled all that out. I'm going to hoist this thing because I'm tired of lifting heavy objects. So let's see how it goes. So, looking at the cylinder bores, they got some wear on them, a little bit of a ridge at the top, but pretty straight. A little bit of a glaze on them, and not much. I mean, it looks pretty good overall. It's got a little bit of carbon buildup, not very much considering how much has been burning. So that all looks pretty good. The head looks about the same. Surprisingly clean all around. I expected a lot more carbon buildup, but whatever has been burning off pretty well. I'm gonna guess the exhaust valve faces and seats are pitted slightly, but not enough to cause any problems. This is looking pretty good overall so far. Alright, next the balance shaft chain, and then the water pump. I dropped the oil pan and got this thing sitting sideways. So now we're going to start pulling the rods out. And that's what they look like down there. I already pulled number 4 out. So, yeah, word of advice, if you're going to put these back together, make sure you number the pistons, which ones they go, because they should go back to the same bores. Okay, that's the number 1 rod cap. As you can see by the bearing, it's got some noticeable wear to it. Not too bad. Bearing stayed on the crankshaft. The upper bearing looks about the same. There's some wear. As on the very edge, it's worn down to the brass. And the piston looks pretty good. The rings are still free. They float around pretty good. Now, I'd like to point out on this particular engine, the connecting rod and cap are not machined. They're actually cast in one piece and then broken in half, then machined, so that each one is unique. They can't be put on backwards or mismatched. If they're not this way, these should be marked, because you don't want to mix them up with other rods or put them on backwards. So that's an interesting thing. Now I'll do the rest of them. I take back what I said. None of these are worn down to the brass. It just kind of looked that way from the lighting. But they all look pretty good. And the journals inside the engine, they also look pretty good. Nothing's really gouged really bad or anything. Everything's still shiny. So that's neat. Now with the block upside down, we're going to pull the bed plate off, which is the lower half of the block, and all the main bearing caps are in one piece. Now each bearing cap location has 6 bolts, 4 of these big ones and 1 small one on each end, except the back. The smaller bolts are out here and here. So, in turning it over, I noticed it just has this smell of like burned oil or something burned. I'm guessing that's piston ring failure. I don't know. A lot of carbon buildup on here too. So, no point wasting time talking. Nice of GM to put this little point here where you can pry on it. Maybe it'd help if I took the bolts out. So the main bearings look about in the same condition as the rods. Yeah, pretty nice. I don't know exactly how worn they are, but they're not gouged or they're not through to the next layer. And the journals are still pretty nice. So there it is. 2.2 liter ecotec with 250,000 miles, all apart.